Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me on the first episode of Dig Deeper, our new distance learning webinar program that is designed to connect students to Indiana geology, geological careers, and research. I am going to give it a few more minutes to see if anyone else hops on, but I am very interested to see who is joining me today. If you would like, go ahead and share where you're calling in from. And if you were watching with any students, let me know the name of your school. Go ahead and add that into the chat. Okay. This program is going to be recorded. This is the first time that we are doing a Dig Deeper episode. And after the live program is over, I will be adding it to our YouTube website and to the Geological Survey's webpage so that people can go back and learn from the video in the future. Once it is added to the IGWS website, I will also add the relevant state curriculum standards and any extension materials that go along with today's topic. Wonderful. Someone from Lafayette. Thank you for joining in. Okay. Well, my name is Polly Sturgeon, and I am the Education Outreach Coordinator for the Indiana Geological and Water Survey. As I mentioned, today is the first day of our Dig Deeper webinar series, and I am excited to not only host the first episode, but be sort of today's guest. Future episodes, which we're planning on having once a month on the third Thursday of the month, future episodes will feature other geologists from both the Geological Survey and other institutions who would like to share their background and their research. But today it is just me, and so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today's program is going to be a mix of sharing my screen and then also sharing things on the camera here. If at any point you have questions, go ahead and add those to the chat. I will be sure to answer those by the end of the program. If you are watching with a classroom of students, feel free to put any questions that they have into the chat, and I'll also answer those. And then if you're watching on the recording of this, you can email us or add them onto the comments in the YouTube page. Okay, I am going to share my screen. All right. So today, the first topic for the Dig Deeper webinar series is going to be exploring ancient environments with Indiana rocks. This is a topic that I get really excited about because it's sort of like going back in time, and you can hold something that's millions of years old in your hand and get to know what that exact environment was a long time ago, which I think is sort of like a time traveler aspect of geology, which is why I chose this as my topic. Again, my name is Polly Sturgeon. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the outreach coordinator for the Indiana Geological and Water Survey. Today, we're going to learn a little bit about my own background as a geologist. I'm going to talk about how to read rocks, just like we read books, but we have to learn the skills to do that. Geologists can read a rock to tell what kind of environment it formed in a long time ago. We're also going to be looking at why we study ancient environments as scientists. And then I might show you some environments that you do know, and also some environments that you don't. A little bit about my background. This is a picture of me when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I visited the Herkimer Diamond Mine in New York. And you can see I'm holding up a piece of quartz that I was very excited about collecting. I have always been very curious about why places looked different. I had the opportunity to live in a lot of different places as a child. I lived in a tropical beach environment. I lived in the mountains. I lived in the glacial plains of the Midwest. I lived on the West Coast, the East Coast, and I was always really curious when I looked out the window of the car when we were driving back and forth. Why did the landscape change from one place to another? And why did the trees look different in one place to another? And why did the rocks look different from one place to another? And so even though I wasn't aware of geology as a career or as a field of science, I was always very curious about these things. And I think that laid the groundwork for my career as a geologist. When I went into college, I started to study history because I was interested in the past. But I took an introductory geology class and I fell in love with it. It was sort of like a light bulb went off. It was giving me the answers to all of these questions I had always had as a child. Geology really helped me understand why places look different. Later on, I went into graduate school and got my master's in science education and in geology because I like teaching people about how to look at the landscape and basically read the landscape to understand geologic time. I have worked in a number of different jobs, and each one has taught me a little bit different things. And so I would always suggest to all students to take any opportunity that you can, even if it's not the most exact perfect job that you think that you want. I have learned something very valuable in each position that I've taken. I've worked as a park ranger for the National Park Service, and that's really where I fell in love with teaching people about the outdoors. I was a field assistant for the U.S. Geological Survey, where I learned how to take measurements in the field and help to make geologic maps. I was a classroom teacher for middle school for a number of years, and I've been working as a geology educator for the Indiana Geological Survey since 2012. The big thing that I get excited about and the large part of my work is focused around is exploring the connections between human history and geologic history. I like that intersection of how people are affected by the geologic past. Here's a picture of me working as a park ranger with that Smokey the Bear hat that everyone thinks about when they think of a park ranger. I ended up creating geology programs at the national park that I worked at. This is me in college. The instrument that I'm holding in my hand is called a Brunton compass. That's something that geologists use to help measure the angle that rocks are tilted at. You can see that the rocks behind me are not flat. So something has happened to push those rocks up into an angle. So I was measuring that, and that would help me understand how the rocks formed the way they did. I am on the left-hand side of this picture here with the gray or the blue headband. That is a picture of me at the Indiana Geological Field Station in Montana. That's a field camp photo where I was learning how to make geologic maps. And here's a picture of me from just a few years ago where I was collecting fossils from an outcrop where I could bring them back and put them into our education collection. Okay, that's a little bit of my background. I want to dive into the topic today, which is understanding ancient environments by looking at Indiana rocks. So this is a really beautiful picture with some water and sand. And I would like to hear from you all. What do you think is going on in this picture? This is obviously a modern picture. It's not a rock. This is something I took a few years ago. But what do you think is going on in this photo? You can go ahead and unmute yourself or put your answers into the chat. Take a minute to really look the photo over. What is going on here? Okay, I've taken a few minutes to look this photograph over. I can see layers of sand. This looks like sand to me. And to me, it looks like the stream is flowing somewhere. I can sort of tell the direction of the water's flow. I can tell that it's going from the left-hand side of the photograph to the right-hand side of the photograph. How do I know that? I can look at the direction of the waves here. And underneath the water, I see these little ridges of sand. If you've ever watched waves come in and out on a lake or a beach, you might recognize those little ridges. Those are called ripple marks that form as water flows over the top of sand. Some other things that I can find in this photograph, I see lots of round pebbles. Okay, there's some round pebbles up in the sand here. Seeing a rock that is round is something you usually see around water because the water breaks down all of those hard edges around the edge of the rock. So that helps me to kind of reinforce the fact that I think this is moving water because I see those ripple marks and I see those round pebbles. Okay, we're going to go ahead and go to the next photograph and compare and contrast. So here's a photograph of a rock, but what do you think is going on in this photo? And does seeing the last picture help you understand this photograph a little bit more? Okay. Looking at this picture, I can see these long lines, very similar to those long lines that we saw under the water in the last picture. And these are ripple marks that have been preserved in the rock. So this is a fossil of ripple marks preserved in this particular rock is called siltstone. It's a very fine green piece of sandstone. And this photograph was taken in Orange County, Indiana. Okay. I like that comparison of a modern picture and then a picture of very old rock. That rock was about 300 million years old, because that is really what I do as a geologist to help me understand ancient environments. I compare the present to the past, and that's how I read the rocks. Just like when you learn to read a book, you have skills that you learn in the classroom about how to read those letters, how to use the different parts of grammar, and put all those things together to understand a story. Similarly, geologists use rock types. We use different structures that we see in the rocks, and we use fossil evidence to help us understand the environment in which a rock formed. I'm going to talk about those three things that help us to read rocks. Rock types, there are three main rock types: igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. Igneous rocks form in volcanic environments where you have lava or magma cooling and hardening into a rock. Because Indiana doesn't have any volcanoes, we don't have igneous rocks preserved in our rock record. Metamorphic rocks are those that form under intense heat and pressure. It's when you take an existing rock and you basically cook it under a lot of heat and a lot of pressure. This typically happens in areas where you are forming mountains, where two pieces of crust are pushing against each other, forming a lot of pressure, and it changes the rock, metamorphoses the rock. That's what that means. We don't have any mountains in Indiana, so we don't have metamorphic rocks within our bedrock. Sedimentary rocks, if you look at the first part of that word, sediment, form from things like sand and silt and grains of mud. Okay, pieces of sediment that glue together to form a hard rock. All of Indiana's bedrock is formed from sedimentary rocks, and so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Some different structures that help us understand environments and rocks. When I talk about structures, I'm talking about how the grains of the rocks, the different minerals, are arranged, whether they're big or small, whether they're angular or round, whether they're all the same size or mixed up. Okay, and then in terms of layering, are those grains or minerals, are they mixed into separate distinct layers? Okay, maybe big layers and small layers alternating, or is it all jumbled together? And then for fossils, fossils are remains or traces of once living organisms. And so we are going to look at some pictures and some actual fossils today. And all three of these things, the rocks, the structures that are inside them, and the fossils, help us to understand what kind of environment a rock formed in. And really, rocks tell us a story. Just like we read books, we read rocks to understand the story of Earth's history. And every day we look at organisms, for example, that live in certain areas and not in others. For example, certain plants, certain trees grow out in open meadows, but very different trees and plants grow in a tropical rainforest. By looking at certain organisms that live very deep in the ocean, there's a different group or assemblage of organisms that live near the shore, or live in the tidal area, or live in a lagoon that happens behind the beach. So those comparisons that we can make with modern organisms are the same comparisons that we can make with ancient organisms and ancient environments. And the rocks contain a record of the places and the events that have occurred over millions of years ago. I am going to stop sharing briefly. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to show you an example using a rock from our education collection. Our education collection is a group of about 2,500 rocks and minerals and fossils that we use to help teach people about Indiana geology. And this rock here, you can see it's a pretty good size. Okay, I'm going to hold it up to the camera. Let's see what we can see inside. You can see it's kind of breaking off in my hand. It's a little crumbly. There's lots of little pieces of dust falling off onto my desk. And it's made up of lots of pieces, those pieces that are breaking apart. Okay. If you look really close, you can see that those are actually pieces of shells, of seashells, that are all sort of stuck together. Okay. This particular rock is a sedimentary rock known as coquina, C-O-Q-U-I-N-A, coquina. And it is a sedimentary rock that is formed from broken up seashells of animals who make their hard body parts out of the mineral calcite. And this kind of rock forms in environments where you would find a lot of seashells. What kind of environment would you find a lot of seashells? Probably not anything on land. Probably not anything in a forest. Okay, there are animals who have hard shells, but not a huge amount of them. You would find a lot of seashells along the beach, and that's where this rock formed. It forms right on the beach area where tides wash in and out, and those tides break apart the shells, which is why they're all broken into bits. They're not nice whole shells of animals. And so this rock was collected in the Caribbean along the beach where it formed, and it's starting to, it's a good example of how we can use the clues in the rocks, the fossils that are in there, the type of rocks, the fact that it's all one mixture of those shells, it's not in distinct layers, to help us understand the environment that it formed in. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. Let's look at some more examples. This time, I'm going to ask you to help decipher the clues to read the rock. Let's say that you found a rock that had the fossils that you see on the screen. One of them is a fossil of a snail or a gastropod. You can see its curly Q shell here. This one is a fossil of a fern leaf, okay, called Picopterus. And you can see all the little leaflets preserved in the fossil. And this here, Calamites, is a fossil of a stem of a reed plant, sort of like a small tree. If you think of horsetails that you find sometimes in wetlands, those are reed plants. And this would be thicker than your arm, is the size of that one. So if you found a rock that had all three of these fossils, which environment did it likely form in? In a forest, a desert, or the bottom of the ocean? Okay, hopefully you've had time to discuss it if you're with a classroom, or think about it in your head. And the answer is a swampy forest. All three of these fossils are about 300 million years old. They're from the Pennsylvanian time period of geologic time. And these are all fossils that you can find in Indiana rocks. Because at that point, about 300 million years ago, Indiana was covered by a very swampy forest. We had giant bugs flying around, dragonflies that were 3 feet wide. We had little snails crawling around in the wet swamp, and we had big giant trees and ferns. It was very warm. We were located near the equator. Okay, so it was a tropical, hot, swampy forest. But I wasn't around back then, so I have to understand what the clues in the rocks to help uncover that environment. Okay. One question that I like to ask is, why do we study ancient environments? And I came up with 4 reasons, but if you have other ideas, I would love to hear them. First of all, curiosity. I think it is really fascinating to hold millions or billions of years of Earth's history in your hand. This is actually a picture of my hand where I scooped up some rocks from the banks of Lake Superior. And you can see there's a fossil in my hand here and some different rocks of different colors. There's igneous rocks and sedimentary rocks in my hand. And these all formed over different time periods in many different environments. So literally in my hand, I'm holding millions of years of Earth's history. And I think that's really, really interesting. And so for me, I'm just very curious about how the Earth formed, and reading the environments can help me, reading the rocks can help me to understand better. Another reason that scientists study ancient environments is to help us get natural resources, the materials that we mine or extract from the earth in order to live our lives. This is a picture of a limestone quarry near Bloomington, Indiana. And these big blocks of limestone are used to build buildings. In other areas, they crush the stone into small gravel-sized pieces, and they use that limestone to build roads and to make concrete. And so every day we're using materials that we mine from the earth. These are called natural resources. And in Indiana, all of our natural resources are contained in sedimentary rocks. And so we need geologists to identify where those sedimentary rocks are, and they have to study the environmental clues to find them so that we can take them out of the earth and use them. Okay. Another reason that we study ancient environments is to help us explore new worlds. This is a picture of the new Perseverance rover that's currently on Mars, studying the ancient environments that helped to form the planet of Mars. Geologists have been collecting samples of other planets for a long, long time. We started when we first landed on the moon in the 1960s, and we brought back pieces of the moon so that to help us study those. And we're currently collecting samples of Mars. We compare those samples to Earth rocks in order to better understand how our universe has formed. And then finally, a 4th reason that we study ancient environments is to help understand climate change. By looking at these ancient environments, we can understand how the environments today are changing due to climate change. And so we can study the past changes to better understand and deal with the changes that are occurring today. So lots of different reasons to look at the environmental clues contained in rocks. All right, we're going to look at a couple of different environments. Some of these you might be familiar with, and some of them they might be new. This picture, go ahead and take a look at this one. What is going on here? Do you see anything familiar? Okay. I put the name of the place this picture was taken. It's called from a place called Dinosaur Ridge in Colorado, which sort of gives a clue that these footprints here are footprints of dinosaurs. The rocks in this picture are from the Cretaceous period of geologic time, which was about 144 million years ago to about 65 million years ago. And these footprints belong to iguanodon dinosaurs, which were big plant eaters with a beak-like jaw. And this picture is of a rock where these footprints were along a beach environment. How do I know that these dinosaurs were walking along the beach all that time ago, 100 million years ago? Well, I have to read the rocks in order to do that. Do you remember back the first photograph I showed you that had those, the stream flowing and it had those ripple marks underneath the water? You can see those same ripple marks in this rock. This rock is sandstone. Sandstone forms at beaches because that's where we have lots of sand. We know that this was on a beach environment because of those ripple marks. And we know that iguanodon dinosaurs, they're not swimming dinosaurs. So this had to be on land and not in the water. So right at that beachfront. So they were walking along beachfront property 100 million years ago. Pretty cool that we can figure all of that out just by looking at a rock. All right, let's look at another example, but from Indiana this time. Okay, what is going on here? I see a rock that's about the size of my hand, maybe a little bit bigger. It looks like it's pretty flat, but it's got these little depressions or holes in it. In what kind of environment would you find little marks like that? It looks like somebody stuck their finger in a couple of times. Okay, hopefully you've had a few seconds to think this over. This is actually a fossil impression of raindrops from the Pennsylvanian period of geologic time. This rock was collected in Orange County, Indiana. It's from the Mansfield Formation. It's sandstone. And these are actually raindrop impressions. Okay. If you can picture rain falling onto a pond and it makes those little droplet marks. Okay. So this rock was actually formed in a tidal flat. All right. There's other ways that we, clues that we use to help us understand that. But if you think of a very flat piece of sand and mud, we have found amphibian tracks in that rock before. We've seen where insects have landed and those layers build up over the top of each other. All of those things help us to come to the conclusion that this was a tidal flat. So you have to have these raindrops being covered very, very quickly in order for them to be preserved. Here's a fun one. These are two photographs of a fossil called a crinoid. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for 1 second. A crinoid is called a sea lily. It's sort of its nickname. From the picture, you might think it looked like a plant, but it was actually an animal. And the top part of it had feathery arms that would filter feed from the water. And it had a long stem that attached to the ocean floor. And it would sway back and forth and grab food out of the water, filter the food out of the water. Okay, this is one of the most common fossils in the rocks around the Bloomington to Bedford area. Let's go back to sharing the screen. So we have those fossils of the stem here and the head called a calyx. But then in this picture, you can see those same little segments of the stem, but they're broken apart, even sometimes into individual segments. This little Cheerio looking thing looks like a small donut or a Cheerio. That's one piece of the stem here. So how are these different? How is the environment for these crinoids in one rock different than the other? Give you a minute to think about the answer. Okay, some observations that I can make. So this piece is all together. To me, it doesn't look broken. This is a crinoid that was found in Mississippian aged rocks. So about 340 million years ago. This was found in Crawfordsville, Indiana. And this picture, because I took it, I know, was taken just outside of Nashville and Bloomington, Indiana, kind of in between those two towns. Okay, but these bits are all broken apart. Well, if you are a crinoid organism and you die and your body parts get broken apart by waves, it might look like the picture on the right-hand side. So I can tell that because these pieces are all broken apart, that this was formed in a more wave action environment, maybe closer up on the shore where waves are breaking along the beach. And these animals, as they died and fell to the bottom, waves broke apart their hard body parts. Whereas this picture on the left-hand side of the intact crinoid, geologists have come to understand that these specimens of crinoids that were found near Crawfordsville were not dead when they were preserved as fossils, that they were actually buried by sediment while they were alive, which is why their body parts didn't break apart. There wasn't a lot of waves. It's something more like a delta, where you have a stream flowing into an ocean and carrying sediment like sand and mud into that ocean and literally burying those organisms, which is why we can see their beautiful fossils all together still. So the same organism, but they were preserved in different environments that were happening at the same time. Okay, two more photos to look at. This picture, this black thing here is the lens of a camera, just to give you a sense of scale. And if you look at this picture, you can see lots of these little white things in this rock. This might be an environment or a type of rock that you are not familiar with. This is called Oolitic limestone. Oolitic, Oolitic. It's one of my favorite rock types because it's kind of fun to say. This Oolitic limestone is from the St. Genevieve Formation, collected in Bloomington, and those little white round grains are the mineral calcite. This kind of rock formed in a very shallow water where you had a lot of tides moving back and forth, and the water was super saturated with that mineral calcite, which means it had so much calcite inside that the calcite literally came out of the water and then it rolled around in the waves. How do I know that? That's a lot of assumptions to start to make. Well, I can use the present day environments to help me inform my past. If you go to the modern day Bahamas, down in the Caribbean Ocean, you can see modern day ooids rolling along on the beach back and forth in that wave environment. The water there is very, very high in percentages of the mineral calcite. And so the calcite precipitates out of the water, forms into little grains, and then rolls back and forth, back and forth. So a lot of times those white sandy beaches on the banks of the Bahamas are actually ooids that you're walking on. And so this is a fossilized version of those ooids, telling us that wherever this rock was collected in Bloomington, that 325 million years ago, for example, we were located on a very similar environment to the Bahamas. Okay, one last one. What is going on here? This is kind of an odd picture. No rocks in the picture. I see sand and I see a tree trunk sticking out of the sand. I can tell from where the man is standing that it looks like it's on a slope. It's not flat here. Looks like it's at an angle. The tree does not look alive anymore because it's brown and kind of falling apart. You can see chunks of it on the sand. Is there anything else we can find by looking at this photograph? Okay. This is a picture from the Indiana Dunes National Park, located in the very top of Indiana along Lake Michigan. And this is a sand dune, which is a kind of like a small mountain or a very large hill made out entirely of sand. And this tree is sticking out of the middle, which is not something you usually see in sand dunes. Okay. And kind of a neat thing is that when one of my colleagues went back a few years later, this tree was buried up even farther. How did that happen? The fact that it's buried in the sand, and then when we went back, we could see that the sand had gone up even higher around the tree, tells us that the sand dune is moving. It's actually burying that tree. So there used to be a series of trees, a small forest here, and the sand dune has moved, both in terms because of geologic activity, but also human activity that has changed the direction of where the sand moves. And it's buried this tree and other trees that are below the sand, but we can tell with ground penetrating radar. So this is a modern environment. This is all happening within human history, but a lot of clues that we can get by studying the landscape. Okay. Those are all of the different pictures or specimens that I would like to show you today to talk about ancient environments. And hopefully this gave you a little bit to think about in terms of how geologists study the rocks and the landscape in order to understand how environments have changed over time. We also study those environments so we can better understand climate change, so that we can just engage our curiosity and our observational skills as scientists. We study these environments to help us get natural resources out of the ground, to use them in our everyday lives. And we study ancient environments to help us understand the origins of our universe and how it's still changing today. I appreciate you all joining me today. If you have any questions, you can feel free to put those into the chat. Or if you think of anything later on, let us know on our Facebook, our Instagram, our YouTube page, and I would be happy to answer. The next month's program will be advertised soon, so I hope you come back and learn a little bit more about a different topic of Indiana geology with one of our geologists from the Geological Survey. Thank you all very much for joining me today. Keep looking around, keep being curious, and exploring the rocks around you. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.